Let me tell you something most people realize far too late in life. The greatest financial danger is not being poor. It is spending 40 years working hard and still arriving at old age without freedom. People think wealth is built in moments of brilliance. It is not. It is built in moments of restraint, tiny moments nobody applauds, moments when you choose the future over the present. You know what fascinates me? A person can survive heartbreak, failure, embarrassment, even physical exhaustion. The quiet fear of running out of money at the end of life, that fear follows people into bed at night. If you are in your 50s or 60s listening to me right now, I want you to understand something very clearly. You are not running out of time nearly as fast as you think you are, but you may be running out of excuses. The world has convinced millions of people that wealth belongs to the young, that if you did not become financially successful by 30, the story is over. I have spent my entire life studying money, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, that belief has destroyed more futures than bad markets ever did. Most people do not fail financially because they lack intelligence. They fail because they spend decades underestimating the power of small daily decisions, a few unnecessary purchases, a few years of delay, a few emotional reactions during market crashes, and suddenly an entire lifetime disappears. Here is one of the hardest truths about money. Your income matters far less than your behavior. I have seen people earning modest salaries retire with dignity and peace, and I have seen millionaires live in quiet financial panic because they never learned how to think long-term. You want to know the real difference between people who build wealth and people who only dream about it? One group uses money to impress strangers. The other uses money to buy freedom. There is a sentence almost nobody says out loud, but millions of people feel it every day after the age of 50. I worked my whole life. So why do I still feel financially fragile? That question is what we need to talk about. The market does not care how old you are. Compounding does not care how late you started. Discipline does not care about your past mistakes. The only thing that matters now is whether you are finally ready to think differently. If you are still alive, still earning, still capable of making decisions, then your financial story is not finished. And the moment you truly understand that, your entire future can change. Most people spend the first half of their life sacrificing their health to make money, or in the second half sacrificing their peace trying to protect it. Real wealth is learning how to escape that cycle before it is too late. I learned very early in life that money amplifies who you already are. If you are impatient, money makes you reckless. If you are fearful, money makes you panic. But if you can become calm, disciplined, and patient, money becomes one of the greatest tools for freedom ever created. You do not need a miracle to reach $1 million. You need emotional control in a world designed to destroy it. The most expensive habit in America is not smoking. It is the habit of making short-term decisions with long-term consequences. Let me give you a definition of financial freedom that nobody on television talks about. Financial freedom is waking up in the morning without fear of bills, without fear of retirement, without fear of becoming dependent on people you once took care of. One of the saddest financial mistakes I see people make in their 50s and 60s has nothing to do with income, intelligence, or opportunity. It is the moment they quietly decide, somewhere deep inside themselves, that it is too late. Not because anybody told them it was too late, but because regret slowly convinced them that the best years are behind them. And once a person starts believing that, they stop behaving like someone with a future. They stop investing consistently. They become overly cautious. They let fear replace logic. That emotional surrender does far more damage than starting late ever could. I have watched people spend years looking backward instead of forward. They replay old decisions in their minds like a courtroom trial. I should have invested earlier. I should have bought that house. I should have stayed in the market. But the market does not reward regret. It rewards discipline. It rewards time. And most importantly, it rewards people who continue planting seeds long after others have emotionally checked out. When I was younger, I understood something very simple about money. Small amounts handled intelligently over long periods become surprisingly large amounts. That truth does not disappear because you turn 55. In fact, many people in their later years actually have advantages they lacked in their 20s. They earn more. They make fewer reckless decisions. They understand consequences better. What they often lack is belief. Let me tell you something important. Compounding is still working, whether you participate in it or not. The question is whether you are giving it something to work with. A person investing steadily for the next 10 or 15 years, while continuing to earn and staying patient, can completely transform their financial future. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly and powerfully. Maybe retirement needs to wait a few more years. There is no shame in that. A few additional years of income combined with continued investing can change the trajectory of your life permanently. What matters now is consistency. Automate the investments. Stop negotiating with yourself every month. Remove emotion from the equation and let discipline take over. The future does not ask whether you started early. It asks whether you finally started seriously. Most people spend their entire lives believing wealth is determined by how much money comes in. I can tell you after decades of watching businesses, markets, and human behavior, that is not true. Wealth is far more dependent on what stays in your hands than what passes through them. I have seen people with modest salaries build remarkable financial security, and I have seen high earners live under constant pressure because every increase in income immediately became an excuse to increase spending. That pattern is one of the most dangerous financial habits in modern life. A raise comes in, and suddenly the car gets upgraded. The house gets larger. The vacations become more expensive. Every improvement in income creates a new monthly obligation. People do not realize it while it is happening, but they are slowly building a lifestyle that requires them to keep running forever. And the problem becomes much more serious in your 50s and 60s because time becomes more valuable. At that stage of life, dramatically increasing income is often difficult. But controlling spending, that is still completely within your control. In fact, it may be the single fastest way to accelerate wealth creation later in life. I have always believed that unnecessary spending steals from your future quietly. It rarely feels dangerous in the moment. A few subscriptions here, a luxury purchase there, dining out too often, upgrading things that were already perfectly functional, none of it feels catastrophic individually. But financial stress is usually created by accumulation, not explosions. Small leaks sink large ships. One of the smarter things a person can do is sit down honestly and examine where every dollar goes each month, not emotionally, rationally. Ask yourself a difficult question. Does this expense improve my life meaningfully, or has it simply become a habit? Those are two very different things, and once you create that gap between earning and spending, protect it aggressively. Redirect that money into investments automatically before you have the chance to consume it. Every saved dollar is not just money sitting idle, it is a worker. It has the ability to go out into the world and earn more dollars on your behalf for decades. That is how wealth is really built. Quietly, deliberately, one disciplined decision at a time. One of the most dangerous emotions in investing is the feeling of being behind. I have watched intelligent people spend decades behaving rationally with money, only to become reckless later in life because panic convinced them they needed to catch up quickly. That is usually the moment serious financial damage begins. When people reach their 50s or 60s and realize retirement is closer than they expected, something psychological happens. Patience starts to feel inadequate. Slow progress no longer feels comforting. And suddenly, the same people who once avoided risk begin chasing things they barely understand. They start listening to predictions, headlines, market personalities, and strangers online promising extraordinary returns. They convince themselves that one big opportunity will erase years of delay, but the market has a cruel way of punishing desperation. I have seen people destroy retirement accounts trying to double their money quickly in speculative stocks, complicated options trades, and investments they could not explain clearly if you asked them a few basic questions. The tragedy is that most of these decisions are not driven by greed. They are driven by fear. Fear of aging, fear of regret, fear of not having enough, And fear is a terrible financial advisor. When I began investing, I never looked for excitement. In fact, if an investment sounded exciting, I usually became more cautious. Real wealth is rarely built through adrenaline. It is built through discipline and rationality repeated for a very long time. The problem is that boring strategies do not make headlines. Nobody goes on television to celebrate someone who quietly invested in strong businesses or broad market funds every month for 30 years. But those are often the people who end up financially secure. You do not need to swing for the fences at this stage of life. You need to stay in the game. Survival matters more than brilliance. Steady growth matters more than dramatic wins, followed by catastrophic losses. If you do not understand an investment completely, leave it alone. There is no shame in simplicity. Some of the best financial decisions are the ones you never make. Turn down the noise. Ignore the constant predictions. Most financial media exists to stimulate emotion, not build wealth. Build your future on consistency instead of excitement. Quiet investing may feel unimpressive day to day, but over time, it becomes extraordinarily powerful. One of the most important lessons I learned about money did not come from making it. It came from understanding how easily it can disappear when people become careless, emotional, or overconfident. The first rule of building wealth is not maximizing returns. It is surviving long enough for compounding to work. That sounds simple, but most people spend their lives doing the opposite. They focus entirely on making money while ignoring the importance of protecting what they already have. And in your 50s and 60s, that becomes even more critical because time changes the equation. When you are young, a major financial mistake can often be repaired with years of future income and decades of recovery. But later in life, one reckless decision can set you back 10 years, sometimes permanently. I have watched people spend decades building retirement savings only to damage everything chasing unnecessary risk, guaranteeing someone else's debt, or living without any financial cushion at all. Most financial disasters do not arrive dramatically. They arrive disguised as optimism. Someone believes the market will keep rising forever. Someone assumes they will always have income. Someone co-signs a loan because they do not want to disappoint family. And then life does what life has always done. It surprises people. That is why protecting capital matters so much. You cannot build a secure future on a fragile foundation. I have always preferred sleeping well over taking unnecessary financial risks. There is enormous value in knowing that a market downturn, job loss, medical issue, or economic recession will not destroy your life. That confidence comes from preparation. It comes from having cash reserves. It comes from avoiding high-interest debt that quietly drains your future month after month. It comes from owning investments you actually understand instead of blindly following trends you hope will work out. One thing I learned very early is that complexity often creates danger. People assume complicated investments are more intelligent investments. Usually the opposite is true. If you cannot explain clearly how you make money from something, you probably should not own it. The goal is not to become rich quickly. The goal is to become financially unbreakable. Because once you reach that point, fear loses its power over your decisions. One of the costliest financial mistakes people make is believing they can outsmart uncertainty. Human beings crave certainty. We want signals, predictions, guarantees. We want someone to tell us when the market will crash, when it will recover, when to buy, and when to sell. But after spending a lifetime investing, I can tell you something with complete honesty. The future has always been uncertain. Every decade gave people reasons to be afraid. Wars, recessions, inflation, political chaos, market crashes, financial panic. Fear has always been available in unlimited supply, and yet, despite all of it, businesses continued producing, economies continued growing, and disciplined investors who stayed patient were rewarded over time. I never built wealth by predicting what the market would do next month or next year. In fact, I have never believed short-term forecasting was a reliable path to long-term success. The real advantage comes from endurance. From staying invested while other people are reacting emotionally. That becomes especially difficult later in life because fear changes as you age. In your 20s, market declines feel temporary. In your 50s or 60s, they can feel personal. Suddenly people begin looking at their accounts differently. A downturn no longer feels like numbers on a screen. It feels like lost time, lost security, lost retirement years, and so many people respond by moving everything into cash the moment uncertainty appears. But there is a hidden danger in that decision. Cash feels safe emotionally, but over long periods, inflation quietly destroys purchasing power. The danger is not always dramatic loss. Sometimes the danger is standing still while the cost of life continues rising around you. I have lived through enough market cycles to understand something important. Downturns are normal. Volatility is normal. Panic is normal. None of those things are permanent. What matters is whether you continue allowing compounding to work on your behalf while others interrupt it with emotional decisions. That is why consistency matters so much. Continue investing even during difficult periods. Reinvest dividends automatically. Ignore the noise of daily market movements because most of it is designed to provoke reaction, not wisdom. If you look at investments through a 10-year lens instead of a 10-day lens, your behavior changes completely. The market rewards patience far more generously than it rewards intelligence, and over time, patience becomes one of the rarest financial advantages left. One thing I have noticed over the years is that many people begin shrinking psychologically long before they need to. Somewhere in their 50s or 60s, they quietly start telling themselves the most productive part of their life is over. They stop learning, stop adapting, stop seeing themselves as valuable in the marketplace. And eventually they begin behaving like someone waiting for life to wind down instead of someone still capable of creating value. That mindset is incredibly expensive. I have always believed that the most valuable investment you can make is in yourself. Markets fluctuate, economies change, businesses fail, but your ability to think clearly, communicate effectively, solve problems, and earn remains one of the few assets you can continuously improve regardless of age. In fact, many people become more valuable later in life because experience compounds too. A person in their 20s may have energy, but someone in their 50s has judgment. And judgment is extraordinarily valuable when you learn how to use it properly. I've seen people completely transform their financial future simply by recognizing that the knowledge they spent decades building still has economic value. The mistake is assuming work only means a traditional full-time job. That is outdated thinking. There are people earning substantial income later in life through consulting, mentoring, advising, teaching, freelancing, or helping businesses avoid mistakes they themselves learned the hard way years earlier. Experience solves problems faster than enthusiasm. And the beautiful thing about increasing income later in life is that much of it can go directly toward investments because major life-building expenses are often already behind you. Children are older, mortgages may be smaller. The opportunity to redirect additional income toward wealth creation becomes much more powerful. I also encourage people never to stop improving their skills. The world changes constantly, and adaptable people continue finding opportunities long after others become obsolete. Learn how to communicate better, learn technology, learn negotiation, learn leadership. Small improvements in skill often create surprisingly large improvements in income over time, and perhaps most importantly, do not rely entirely on one source of income. Financial security grows stronger when money begins arriving from multiple directions. One paycheck creates dependence. Multiple income streams create resilience. I think many people underestimate how much financial momentum they can still create in the later chapters of life. But momentum does not come from wishing for easier circumstances. It comes from remaining useful, curious, and willing to keep growing long after most people stop. The moment you stop investing in yourself is usually the moment your financial life starts slowing down. If I had to choose one advantage that mattered more than intelligence, education, or even opportunity in investing, I would choose emotional discipline every single time. Because eventually, every investor faces moments where emotions become louder than logic. The market drops sharply, headlines become terrifying, people around you start panicking. And in those moments, your financial future is often decided not by what you know, but by how you behave. Most people think investing is about finding the right stocks. It is not. investing is largely about managing yourself. I have seen highly educated people lose enormous amounts of money because they could not control fear or greed. And I have seen ordinary people build extraordinary wealth simply because they remained calm while everyone else was emotional. The market has a way of transferring money from impatient people to patient people. That pattern has repeated for generations. What makes this even more important later in life is that mistakes become more expensive. In your 20s, a reckless financial decision may cost you time. In your 50s or 60s, it can cost you security. A panic sale during a downturn, a speculative investment driven by fear of missing out, or a major emotional reaction to short-term volatility can permanently alter retirement plans. And the difficult part is that emotions feel rational when you are inside them. When markets fall, your brain starts trying to protect you. That instinct served human beings well for survival, but it works terribly in investing. Fear creates urgency. Urgency creates impulsive decisions. And impulsive decisions usually create financial regret. That is why systems matter so much. I have always believed you should make important financial decisions when you are calm, not when you are emotional. Write down your investment principles clearly. Decide in advance how you will behave during market downturns. Automate investments whenever possible so discipline does not depend on daily motivation or mood. And perhaps one of the healthiest financial habits a person can develop is limiting exposure to constant financial noise. Most media profits from emotional stimulation, not thoughtful investing. Fear keeps people watching, panic keeps people clicking. But none of that improves long-term returns. You do not need to check your portfolio every hour to become wealthy. In many cases, the less frequently you react, the better your outcomes become. I have often found that inactivity is one of the most underrated forms of intelligence in investing, because in the end, financial success is rarely destroyed by bad information. It is usually destroyed by emotional behavior in moments that required patience instead. One of the strangest things I have observed about human nature is that people often assume complicated means intelligent. If something sounds sophisticated, filled with technical language and complex strategies, they immediately believe it must be superior. But investing has taught me the opposite lesson over and over again. Complexity often hides confusion, and confusion is expensive. Some of the worst financial decisions people make come from the desire to feel clever rather than the desire to build wealth carefully. They chase strategies they barely understand because simple approaches feel too ordinary. They believe successful investing should feel exciting, technical, fast-moving, but real wealth creation rarely looks dramatic while it is happening. In fact, most genuinely successful investing is almost boring. I have spent my entire life focusing on things I could understand clearly: businesses with understandable products, predictable economics, rational management. I never felt pressure to invest in every new trend or financial innovation. If I could not explain how something made money in plain language, I was comfortable walking away from it. That willingness to stay simple has protected me countless times. The danger with complexity is not just that it becomes harder to manage. The real danger is emotional. When people do not fully understand what they own, fear grows quickly during uncertainty, and fear leads to poor decisions. The more complicated the strategy, the easier it becomes to panic when things stop making sense. I have seen people constantly buying and selling investments, adjusting portfolios every week, reacting to every headline, every prediction, every market movement. They confuse activity with progress, but excessive movement often creates taxes, fees, stress, and mistakes while adding very little actual value. Meanwhile, someone quietly investing into broad market funds, contributing consistently to retirement accounts, and leaving their investments alone for decades often ends up outperforming them. That is difficult for people to accept because simplicity does not satisfy the ego. Simplicity does not make you feel special at dinner parties. But simplicity works. A good portfolio should not feel like a mystery you need to decode constantly. You should be able to explain your strategy clearly in a sentence or two. If it requires endless explanation, there is a good chance it is more complicated than necessary. I have always believed investing should fit your life, not consume it. The goal is not to spend every waking hour staring at screens and reacting emotionally to markets. The goal is to build a system that quietly compounds while you live your life peacefully. And the truth is, boring investments have made more people wealthy than exciting ones ever will. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have about money is believing that more of it automatically creates peace. It does not. I have met people with enormous wealth who live with constant anxiety, and I have met people with far less who feel deeply secure. The difference usually comes down to one thing: purpose. If you do not define what money is supposed to do for your life, you can spend decades chasing numbers without ever feeling satisfied. People tell themselves they need $1 million or $2 million or $5 million, but very few stop and ask the deeper question, what am I actually trying to build? Without that clarity, money becomes an endless scoreboard, and scoreboards never create peace. They create comparison. I have never viewed money as a tool for status. Status is one of the most expensive addictions in society because it traps people in a cycle of performing wealth instead of building freedom. They buy things to impress people they barely know and then spend years working to maintain appearances that bring very little genuine happiness. Real wealth feels very different. Real wealth is being able to sleep at night without financial fear. It is having control over your time. It is being able to handle unexpected problems without panic. It is having the freedom to say no to work that drains your spirit. That is what money is supposed to buy. And when you understand that clearly, your financial behavior changes. Suddenly, you stop spending emotionally to impress strangers. You stop chasing lifestyles that quietly exhaust you. You begin asking much better questions. What kind of life do I actually want? What monthly income would genuinely make me comfortable? What expenses truly improve my quality of life? And which ones are simply habits shaped by culture and comparison? Most people never take the time to answer those questions honestly. I have always believed clarity creates discipline. When you know exactly what you are building toward, saying no becomes easier. You no longer feel deprived when you avoid unnecessary spending because you understand the trade-off clearly. Every dollar saved becomes a vote for your future freedom instead of your present image. And perhaps the most important thing money can buy later in life is not luxury, but peace of mind. The ability to protect your health, reduce stress, spend time with people you love, and live without constant financial pressure. Because in the end, the true value of wealth is not what it allows you to show people. It is what it allows you to stop worrying about. I think one of the greatest misconceptions about wealth is that people believe it appears suddenly. They imagine a breakthrough moment, a lucky investment, a dramatic opportunity that changes everything overnight. But after spending a lifetime around money, businesses and investors, I can tell you that lasting wealth almost never arrives that way. Real wealth is usually the result of behavior repeated consistently for a very long time. In many ways, financial success is less about finance and more about character. The habits you practice daily eventually shape the life you end up living. Every decision, no matter how small, pushes you toward a future version of yourself. And most of those decisions feel insignificant when they happen. Choosing to invest instead of spend, deciding not to panic during a downturn, living slightly below your means, staying patient when progress feels slow. None of those moments feel life-changing individually, but together, over years and decades, they become enormously powerful. Character compounds the same way money does. I learned early in life that discipline is far more valuable than brilliance. A person with average intelligence and exceptional consistency will usually outperform someone highly intelligent but emotionally impulsive. Because eventually, success belongs to the people who can continue making rational decisions long after excitement disappears. And that is especially important in a world that constantly encourages short-term thinking. Everywhere you look, people are being told to consume now, react now, upgrade now, become rich now. Very few people are encouraged to think about who they want to become 20 years from today. But that future version of you is being built right now by your daily behavior. I have always believed one of the smartest financial habits is learning to make decisions your future self will quietly thank you for later. Sometimes that means investing before spending. Sometimes it means delaying gratification. Sometimes it means accepting slow progress without becoming discouraged, because wealth rarely grows in a straight line. There are periods where it feels invisible, months where nothing exciting happens, years where discipline feels unrewarded. But beneath the surface, something important is happening. The habits are strengthening, the investments are compounding, the foundation is being built. Most people quit during the boring phase because they mistake slow progress for failure. But patience is not passive. Patience is active trust in the process, and eventually, if you stay consistent long enough, the behaviors become results. The discipline becomes freedom. The small decisions become a completely different life. Because wealth is not just a number in an account, it is the reflection of who you became while building it. The path to $1 million in your 50s or 60s is not about brilliance. It is not about finding the perfect stock. It is not about luck. It is about becoming financially unemotional, deeply disciplined, and relentlessly consistent. That is the real lesson from Warren Buffett. The people who eventually build wealth are usually not the loudest people in the room. They are the calmest, the most patient, the most deliberate, and the most willing to keep going long after everyone else becomes distracted.